Welcome to The Road Less Traveled with Tiffany Rosenbaum. This podcast is about sharing the success and failure of entrepreneurs. Join in and learn from others' mistakes so you don't have to go through the same hardships in business. Now let's welcome your host, business coach, real estate investor, and proud wife and mom, Tiffany Rosenbaum.
Welcome to another episode of The Road Less Traveled. I'm incredibly excited because we have Sina on today, not only an entrepreneur, but someone that has built SaaS companies, sold SaaS companies, and then decided to rebuild them again. Sina, thank you for being on today. This is such an honor to have you on our podcast.
Oh, the honor is all mine. Anytime I get to spend with you is a good time, so I appreciate you having me on the show.
You know, it is a lot of fun. I do feel like every time we get together, I'm a sponge around you because you're incredibly knowledgeable, and anybody in the industry or anybody that gets to spend time with you understands that because you're a wealth of knowledge. But I'd love for, before we go into some acquisitions that we're going to talk about today, I'd love for you to tell us your origin story. Like, how did this all come about? How did you get to want to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way I was somewhat of an accidental entrepreneur because started my career even before like going off to college. I was always working in the family office. We own and manage real estate in Northern California. Mom and dad were super successful, mostly developing real estate and then managing them as, you know, kind of part of our own portfolio. So summer jobs were work at the mini storage, go work at the multifamily building and help us collect rent. So not sexy stuff, but definitely taught me a lot about the industry, just being around it pretty much my whole career. Had a brief stint out of college working for Oracle, which was about, call it 2-ish years. And in that time, it was really kind of the beginnings of all the technology craze. Came to San Francisco where I grew up, and it seemed like the hot place to be for jobs. And working at Oracle at the time, it was pioneering CRM, and met a guy named Mark Benioff who was starting a company called Salesforce, and got lucky and ended up there. Fast forward, a few years later, we're pioneering, SaaS software. And doing some pretty amazing things. So I had the opportunity to work for 2 billionaires, which were very disruptive in Larry Ellison and Mark Benioff, and learning from them. And I think me falling into being an entrepreneur was really just purely accident, where my dad was showing me a piece of software he used to run his business called Yardi, and was like, God, it seems like we should have a newer version of this. And then looking around and seeing that there was no real SaaS solution at the time for property management. So my high school buddy and I decided to design a product called Propertyware, and it was really for our own itch. And lo and behold, it became a full-blown, company with, more than 35 million in revenue and growing quickly, and ended up selling that business to RealPage. And that kind of started a whole new chapter. But yeah, I guess that's my origin before where I'm at right now.
Well, it's incredible because I used Propertyware, and when I came onto Propertyware, I didn't know who you were. I was very young in the industry, very naive, but Propertyware was a great product. So you started that product from the need of your parents, a necessity, right? They needed a product, a SaaS, a software for the property management side. But you built it for 35 million, and then when did you decide, okay, well, it's time for me to exit?
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I'll give you kind of the sound bites that really people who listen to this can hear. I do believe that when you create a business to scratch like a personal itch, you're always destined to do better because you inherently understand the problems that your customers are going to face, right? And so because I had like the incubator, which was my own family office, to build Propertyware, it was really easy to quickly understand the challenges. That being the caveat that like, probably my worst customer was my own family business. Like they gave me the worst feedback and always would push back just because I'm their son. They're like, we're not going to use it. We don't like it. So it definitely helped to get other customers. And we grew that thing very organically. It's funny to even say this now, but there was a time when, when you were building software, if you weren't building on one of the major platforms, people would question why you were doing it a certain way. So we bootstrapped the business for quite some time. There's a whole argument about like building a business with, other people's money versus bootstrapping it with your own, different conversation. But we had gotten to about somewhere around $1 million on our platform. And at the time, I had a competitor that just shown up, a company called Appfolio, and it raised a lot of money, which at the time seemed like a lot of money, but now it's like not that much money. But I felt a lot of pressure to feel like I could keep up with their pace of innovation, even though we were ahead as a product. And I still feel like in a lot of ways, Propertyware is, very uniquely positioned in the industry for what it did and still does today. But the pressure to sell the business came because I was looking at kind of what I had accomplished in 7 years. And like you go into any investment, you have to have a timetable for when you're going to exit. You can't just do it for the rest of your life. At least that's how I was thinking at the time, because I was a real estate investor and you have 5 to 7 years of which you want to turn the business over and, cash out. And so we were at 7 years and it felt like that was the point where we were either going to raise a big round and keep going or exit. And I think part of exiting was looking at the industry and what was happening at the time. And what was happening was that RealPage was very acquisitive, and they were buying a lot of companies because they were trying to go public, and we fit really nicely into their portfolio where I could see myself adding a lot of value. But in hindsight, I think I probably in some arguments would have done it differently, but it's hard to question, the things you learn along the way. So at the time, it made a ton of sense.
Hindsight's 2020, right? Like you always can look back and say, oh, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But did you have multiple offers? Did you go out and search for buyers, or did they find you? How did that happen?
Yeah. I think you're always in the best place to sell a business when you're not looking to sell a business. So I was not looking to sell the business, but a close friend of mine had sold his company to RealPage the year before. A very talented entrepreneur named Suki Singh. He had sold ops technology to them the year before, and had a lot of respect for him, and he ultimately sold me on the idea of selling my business to RealPage. I had no intention of doing so. And I think that's really the best acquisitions happen when you're really not looking. I've had a lot of my peers who are actively looking to sell their business. And I usually find that, while that can yield an outcome that's also favorable, my outcome was more organic. It was a slow dance where I got to know the other company, saw where I fit in with them, and an offer just kind of made sense at some point that we would join them.
100%. And I like that you said something a little bit earlier. You said, you're going to have to exit sometime, right? You're not going to always be in the business. And a lot of times entrepreneurs today, if you ask them in property management, hey, when do you want to exit? Never. Well, you only have a few ways out, and you're going to die one day. It's not optional. Your health is going to go down, or you want to leave because you want to travel with family. You're going to leave your business. And so I think what you said there was very intricate for people to realize. You almost had the plan with the end in mind. Doesn't mean you're going to sell today. It doesn't mean you're going to sell in 7 years. It doesn't mean you're going to sell in 10 years. But the point of it is to have an option to sell when that comes, or when you need to, like you said, the best time to sell is when you're not looking, because then you can walk away if the deal doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, not to get too sappy, but when we first started Propertyware, I was a kid. I was in my 20s, and not to date myself, but I wrote on a whiteboard in front of my team. I said, we had a vision of what we wanted to be, and I was like, I want to build a product that'll be around 20 years from now. And we did that. We accomplished that. We started in 2001. It's 2026. That product is still out there. So I had that as a vision, but it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to be with the business 26 years later. The vision was that I wanted to I wanted to kind of check a few boxes for myself. And I think, like you live in the Bay Area, it's a very intense environment here. You don't get into tech and have no score. The score is how big of a business can you build and how fast can you build it? And then who do you exit it to? You don't just build legacy businesses where you sit in it like Apple for the rest of your life, because it's very rare. So I had to have an end in sight. And for me, it felt like in 7 years, if we're not at a place where, somebody is interested in this business, it's a failure. Now, that being said, like there are a lot of twists and turns in that journey. Like, you start that business and year one, we had no idea what the hell we were doing. We were churning over customers left and right. I think we put some people out of business because they trusted something that didn't work very well. But, over time, it started to make a lot of sense. And we took a lot of, churns, which I thought we would be going in one direction, and ultimately it wasn't the right idea. There was actually a really good movie, which I used to quote quite a bit with entrepreneurs in the early days when I was coaching them. Two climbers called Into the Void. They're climbing up a mountain in South America. Long story short, one of the climbers slides off the side of the cliff, falls probably to his death, but doesn't die. He lands in a sheet of ice, breaks every bone in his lower torso and can't walk. And he's like, okay, I'm going to die here. But then he didn't die. And he's like, wait, I see a little crack in the ceiling there. Maybe if I could just crawl up to that crack and see what's up there. And he crawled out of the crevasse, and then he's on the top of the ice field. And he kept making these little decisions, not knowing where he was going, but ultimately with the goal of survival. And it was through a whole bunch of little decisions, and a couple of them were completely wrong, and he had to backtrack, and he's crawling on his stomach. But I feel like that's what business is all about, is making a lot of small decisions that you can undo quickly instead of having like one big bet. And if it fails, then you're screwed. And so that was the story of building Propertyware, was just like, following intuition, but also making a lot of small decisions. And at some point we were sitting on something really valuable. Now, looking back in hindsight, I should have kept going, because we had achieved and kind of gotten to a place where a lot of the risk in the business was gone, and there was the opportunity to really kind of accelerate and grow. And I think that's the lesson I got through an acquisition, and also since working with private equity firms and others, to really like identify where you are in the journey of building a business and understand, like, are you willing to do the next thing? Or is this as far as your goal was, and just, hey, call it a day and be happy that you got it to where it was.
No, it's incredible what you built. The question I have is, when you went into the acquisition side and y'all started you had a contract or whatever, you was starting the due diligence. How long was the due diligence during that phase? And the reason why I ask that is I acquire PMC companies, and people that are selling sometimes don't understand what due diligence should be. And a SaaS company, a PMC company would be different. But what did due diligence look like when you sold Propertyware?
The most painful thing I had to go through, far and away, because not because it's a negative thing. Yeah. It's because if I were to build a company today from ground zero, there would be no due diligence, because everything is right there, because you've instrumented your company and you have all the metrics people are looking for. And honestly, if you build your business knowing you're going to someday want to exit that business, you should always have that information clean and tidy and available to you. I mean, it may not be like real time, but it could be no more than like a week's worth of work to pull together the information. But in my case, it was really painful, because we had run the business by the seat of our pants. And, all of a sudden somebody's asking me for customer walks and information that required me to like look at my data in ways I did not have it. And that was really interesting, Tiffany, because like, if I go back and I look at that journey for me, it took me probably 2 to 3 months to get it all put together the way I needed it. They brought auditors in our office, and they like took a conference room. It was super disruptive. And my employees are like, who are these people? And like, why are they here? And I'm like, don't worry about it. But it was very disruptive, because I didn't have the materials the way that they needed to be. That being said, there was another little aha moment, is as the materials got more structured for me, I had a very different opinion about my business than I did going into like, hey, I just want to sell my company. All of a sudden I'm like, whoa, this company could get really big, or, oh, wow, this company is not doing as well as I thought it was. Like, you really have these moments where you get to like see the x-ray and the doctor's standing next to you and you're like, ugh, probably should have ate better for a long time, or gosh, like I have a lot of potential. So it is a very revealing process. And I think if you do it at the point that you're deciding to sell, you may have a lot of different opinions about where you're at or what you're worth. We all think what we built, our baby, is beautiful and it's worth a lot of money. But when you look at the data, you're like, gosh, I don't have contracts for 20% of my customers. I haven't raised their prices in 9 years. Like, there's all these hidden gotchas that someone else is going to inherit. And that's where, in the case of my acquisition, there's a holdback period where someone buying you is going to be like, look, you better stick around and nothing better explode in my face before this business is fully integrated. So there's a lot of learnings and all of that.
I love that you brought that up, because I think it's very much the same in PMC world when it comes to due diligence. I think entrepreneurs tie their self-worth to the amount of money their business is worth. And when you open up the blinds behind the door and you really start digging into it, they need to separate those two things, because if you're not making 10% or if you're not making 5% or whatever it is, you need to understand there's a metric of what the business is worth. And it's different from what the entrepreneur is worth, which even though sometimes they do want to put those things together.
Yeah. And just before you jump off that point, I do want to say that if you're an entrepreneur, a lot of your identity goes into your personal or your career and building something. I think anyone who builds a business, it's an outlet for them to express creativity and their self-worth in some ways. And some people, like myself, after I sold Propertyware, I was lost without my company. My identity was gone. But you said something earlier in the conversation which resonates really well with the 50 plus version of me, which is, at some point you start to think about your life, and you're like, am I going to continually grind away at this thing forever? And then if today was the last day of my life, is this the way I want to be spending it? Or is there something better that I'm holding off on because I'm so committed to seeing this thing to the end? One of the hardest things I had to do is I actually shut down one company between Propertyware and Apply, and it was hard. 2 years, I put more than $1 million of my money into it, and I had to just say, look, enough is enough. This is not going anywhere. What can I get for this business? And let me walk away, because my life is too short to spend with the stress and everything that comes with this business. It's time to call it quits. And that was really hard.
I love that you brought that up, because successful people, a lot of times you don't see the failures. You don't, what we call failures in that sense, and you don't see them, the businesses they're shutting down or the nights they're up in the middle of the night. What's interesting, I did not know that you had shut down a business, but I have shut down too. And we shut them down really early on, where it's this isn't going to work. The partnership's not going to work. So there wasn't a whole lot of money that went into it, but there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And when you have to make that decision, it's incredibly hard. But the faster you make that, the better off you are to move forward and get through to the next phase of what you're wanting to create.
I mean, one of the hardest things I've had to do in my professional life is write letters to people who bet on me. And I had to tell them that I couldn't give them a return on their investment in the company that we had started. And it was hard because I had had a success. I had had the opportunity of handing, people 5 to 10 times their money back in my first company. So I just felt invincible. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, there are no guarantees everything you come up with is going to work. And the hardest thing is to tell someone that their money is gone and there's nothing you can do about it, and the shame you feel over it. And to pick yourself up and say you can either do it again or hey, you're done. This is not for you. You're not built to go stress out and try to do this one more time. And I think that's the soul searching that a lot of entrepreneurs do when they build a business.
I agree with you. A lot of soul searching, trying to figure out what the next step is, what they really want, and having to make the hard conversations and hard decisions that only the entrepreneur has to make. And I think that's what also drives them as well. Now, so you sold RealPage. you went through this phase of you were lost and trying to figure out, and I love that you brought that up, because I think what you hit on that head is really important, because there's entrepreneurs, I can't remember the statistics, but there's a lot of people selling right now because they're trying to get out of businesses, but they haven't thought about what they're going to do. What did you do during that time to figure out, to navigate that?
Besides drive my wife crazy and my family crazy, well, I think you're lucky, Tiffany, that you have an incredible husband and you guys are so like connected in your ventures. But a lot of entrepreneurs, they're alone in that journey. The highs are so high and the lows are so low. And it's like, I can talk to you and like in 5 seconds, I'm like, you don't have to say anything. I know you and I feel that gravity that our business pulls and what it does to us and how passionate you have to be. You can't have a bad day. You know, you walk in the office with that grumpy face on and everyone's looking at you like, is there something wrong, Tiff? Like, what's going on? Like, are we not doing well? And so you're constantly, like, you've got this like weight of the world on your shoulders at all time. And no matter how much of a distortion field I can create, and I can create a big one that can convince you of anything, deep down inside, you are constantly like, you know, it's like that Stewart thing, like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough. Like, you're constantly picking yourself up. No one else is there to pick you up. And then when it's over all of a sudden, and, you know, your business is gone and you don't have to pick up your phone. I remember the day after I was done, and I like woke up in the morning and I just went to go grab my phone and there weren't 1,000 emails that I needed to get back to. There was nobody waiting so desperately for Sina to solve their problems. There was a sense of like emptiness that I did not know how to fill that took a little bit of time for me to understand, because you're just like, you're on this train or this plane and it's flying 1,000,000 miles an hour and all of a sudden you just jump off. And you're just stranded in the middle of Siberia and everyone feels like they're on the plane still going. So there was one part of the FOMO, which is watching everything happening. Like if you go into LinkedIn the day after you sell a business, you probably are going to be on Prozac by the end of the week, because you're looking at everybody else still doing what you did for most of your life. And all of a sudden you're like, where do I fill this emptiness? And hopefully the healthy thing for you is to like, don't go into LinkedIn anymore, you know, like go on with the rest of your life. Go do yoga, go mountain biking, spend time with your kids. Yeah. But, you know, for me, that was like, I was too young to do that. I still felt like there was an itch to be scratched, another chapter to be written. And, you know, like I kind of look at our lives as like a story that I felt like was missing a few chapters that I still hadn't done, because in doing Propertyware, like, it was like just happening to me. I couldn't enjoy any of it. Now with Aptly coming off of a failure and a success, everything's so much slower and intentional. There's no rush, and there's a feeling of joy that comes with every single connection I have with every single person. I'm authentic. I don't have to like be fake. People see me and they really see me. Like, it's so much better. So I know that after this chapter, when I'm ready to be done with this, I can take that into the rest of my life confidently, you know?
Well, you just unloaded a wealth of knowledge, which I don't think people heard really. And I'm going to go back to it, because what you described on your lost and not understanding, you know, you go onto LinkedIn, you're seeing everybody doing what you did. And now you feel lost. I actually think the same reason why entrepreneurs don't grow their business. They're both kind of mimicking each other. People, when they sell their business, they don't feel that love and that need anymore. And when people grow their business and it runs without them, they're scared that they're not going to be needed anymore. And so often we want to be needed. We want those emails. We want that chaos. It's the psychology behind the human mind that we need to feel needed. But in reality, we're actually choke holding the business a lot of times when people don't grow it past the point of them being needed. But I love that you went through that, because a lot of people actually at the same time don't want to sell when they know they need to, because of the fact they don't know what to do after, because their identity is wrapped up in it.
Yeah. And it's hard when you've worked so hard on something to, you know, let it go and find a new identity. I mean, I know some people who've gone on to be DJs and people who've like, you know, found other passions that they love, but ultimately if you put your life in perspective, and for me, what's an interesting anecdote of Propertyware to Plan Chat, which was my middle startup, like I really loved to travel. I'm like, well, I'm going to go do that. And I went and I tried to build a travel startup and, got it handed to me because I realized like, I don't know anything about travel. And I defaulted back to going into the industry I knew and loved. And I see this happening a lot. A lot of people will sell a company, take some time off, and then go back and build something else in the same space. And that's okay. But I think you have to ask yourself like the why, because if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you feel like you're kind of like, and this is what I felt with Apply in the early chapters was like, oh my gosh, how much work we had to put into Propertyware to get it where it was. And I'm at square zero and there's no shortcuts to this. There's no AI that'll just boost you to the finish line. It's like, you're just going to have to grind it out. And then in that grinding, you're like, why am I doing this again? Because this is like literally going back in time. But my kids will ask me once in a while, we like talking about time travel. Like, would you go back, Tiffany, to be the 13-year-old Tiffany right now? Would you do that?
No.
No? See, I would 100% love to repeat chapters of my life with the wisdom I have now.
Okay, hold up.
That's not for everybody.
I get the wisdom that I have now?
Yes, of course.
If I get the wisdom that I have now, yeah, because I would be...
So what is leave
the lights bulb. That's
what is 13-year-old? Yeah, what does 13-year-old Tiffany do differently?
Oh, 1,000%. I wouldn't change the mistakes I made in high school. I wouldn't change the mistakes because I think there are mistakes that actually help you grow into the person you need to become. And if you take away every challenge, then you take away the learning opportunity to become the resilient person you need to become. So, but what I would do, there are a few things that I would change. In 2009,
all right, give us one.
I'd buy a lot more real estate.
Of course. It's like Back to the Future. You'd get one of those sporting betting magazines and go bet on all the winning teams.
Oh, yeah. And during high school, I would have done the same thing. And I would have bet on that. But one of the biggest things I would have changed in business, because I was very naive and very immature as a business owner when we first began, I didn't understand how important the team was to be able to grow the company. And so from day one, I would have built the team and put a lot more emphasis on the team the day I started it to make sure that we could grow a lot quicker. But I was one of those business owners that I wanted to feel needed. I wanted the emails. Yeah. I wanted all that. And so it took me a while to realize that it's really the wrong mindset. There's a lot of other things I would change, but those are probably some of the biggest ones. What about you? I got to ask you that. What would you change? If you had to be back at 13 with all the wisdom you have today, what would it be?
I think you definitely said something I would agree with, which is if you're not feeling scared and feeling a sense of anxiety to do something, then you're not growing as a human. And, when you're young, we have a tendency to run away from things. And, I do believe the longer you run away from things, they're just going to come and repeat themselves for you. So I do feel like there's a lot of lessons in life that I probably could have learned a lot faster if I just really owned up to them and just said, hey, this is something I need to overcome my fear and just do it. So I think a lot of my early high school years were they were great years. I mean, fantastic. But I also think that there was things that I did not know I was capable of because I was afraid to try or I was afraid to fail. And I think failing today, even more so, I think there's a whole generation behind us that's afraid to fail. It's just the consequences are higher. Social media's got you on camera. You've got people who know what happened. And I think that's unfortunate because we could silently fail at my era and nobody would know about it except for you. Now I feel like everyone will know about it. You also said something else I really think is important to my journey and my origin story is I am not who I am without the people around me. I'm not going to try to act like I'm superhuman and I'm some extraordinary person. I am a product of the people who raised me, my parents, my family who cared enough about me to give me the opportunity to go take risks. I wouldn't have been the entrepreneur I am today if it weren't for my mom and dad to say, dream and dream big and go do it. And don't worry, if everything falls apart, we are here for you. And a amazing friend that I knew from 14 years old that to this day, Adam Silverthorne, he's Batman, I'm Robin. I don't care what the analogy is. Like, I am nobody without the crew behind me, and Christina and everyone else that is really my inspiration every day, because they let me be me and the best version of me. And so I try to give them that same gift back every day by uplifting them and giving them the support they need the way I got it when I was starting my journey, because you cannot be an entrepreneur in this world and do it without help. Everybody needs their community. Everybody needs their support system. And I needed mine, and now I'm giving back to people who need theirs.
Oh, I love that. 100%. No entrepreneur can do it by themselves. There's a saying that I love is, you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you better go with a team. And it's it's so true. And, I said something that I think people need to understand is, when you fail or you struggle, that's how we get sharpened. And one of the biggest things that I would never take back is when I was on food storage. I think, and I was grateful you mentioned your parents, and I'm like, to this day, people ask me, would you take that experience back? Are you upset that your parents wouldn't take you off or take you out of that struggle? And I look back, I'm like, no. Without that struggle, I'm not resilient like I am today. And I think all our experiences, our struggles, are what makes us who we are. Like, think about it. Like, and we're going to talk about Apple because I'm really excited about that. But you had a struggle, and now you're fighting and you're doing something extraordinary. If that one would have gotten off the ground, you wouldn't be doing this. So I think it's so interesting how life has its way of teaching us and molding us into who we need to become if we allow it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think there's the struggle part of it that defines us, but I do feel like, going back to the team comment, when you surround yourself with people that aren't exactly like you kind of become the sum is greater than the parts in the company model too. Like, I'm always fascinated by how the minds of my teammates work. Like, we have an incredibly talented team. I don't want to leave off names, but like John Oyen on my team, for example, he's so talented, and the way his brain works is so different than mine. But that when we come together and we have a conversation about how we want to solve a problem, something amazing happens. Something that AI can never do, and that humans will always beat it at, is when we band together. Like, some sci-fi future version of this conversation is how AI may be so advanced, but it'll never have the empathy, compassion, and understanding of a group of humans that band together to solve a problem together. AI is so predictable, and it's so black and white binary. Humans have the ability to really analyze and understand things at such a deep level, because they've had the failures, because they've had the successes, because they've been afraid, because they know what it's like to be lonely, to be loved. These are things that technology can't know, and that makes us so special and makes every business so different. And as an entrepreneur, when you're selling it, it's all wrapped up inside of that thing, and you're selling it to somebody else. So there's a lot of emotion tied into it. And when you're buying it, you're looking at this thing, and if it has no personality, it's probably not for you either.
100%. Oh, I love that you brought that up, because AI is great, but guess who has to prompt it? Guess who has to make it learn? It's us. And I think that's incredibly important for people to understand, because the entrepreneur, the team, is still what drives everything. And so often people get scared because AI is coming into the business. Well, learn how to deal with AI, because if you can learn how to prompt it and educate it, then you become more valuable. The prompt is what makes it work. And so I love that you said that. So, but we're going to go on to a little bit further. You went from RealPage, you selling to RealPage, you stepped away from another business, and then you decided, I'm not done. I need something more. So how did you step away from a business? Because, to be honest, I can't even imagine the gut wrenching, because I've had to step away. Yeah, I can't. I mean, I remember shutting down a business, and it hurts, and it's not fun. But then you walked away, and then you said, hey, I'm ready for, I'm glad for punishment. That's what I always say. So what was that like? What happened during that time to say you weren't done?
Yeah. I think philosophically, when you sell a business, you should just ride off into the sunset and do something else. But if there are things that you feel like you didn't accomplish, or there's something that you learned that you feel like, God, if I could just have another crack at it, I know I can do this better. That was really the mindset at the time, was like, first of all, I was too young to just retire. Although a lot of my peers took kind of cushy jobs and just kind of like, they were kind of half working. I still felt like I love, and I still to this day, I'm very passionate about building things that create value and worth to the people that use them. For me, it's not just a superpower. It's just something that I find like self-worth in, to know that I can create something that somebody else really values. And, you talk about the AI piece. Like, I've been in a room with 100 people where, we're all using the same AI, but different things come out of it because of like the person who's behind it. And so what I realized, which was really validating for me, was that after 100,000 hours of doing something for so long, that AI just made it very obvious that I was so good at it, because I was able to without any barriers in front of me, churn an idea or something that was like needed a visualization into something that was like, there you go, that's what it looks like. And people are like, wow, you made that look so much better than I thought it would. And it's because after amassing all this knowledge, I knew exactly what I was looking for. And that's the impetus of wanting to do it again, was like, what it's supposed to look like. How you would have done it differently. You can execute better. But the funny thing is even though that, there's no replacement to the kind of the effort that's involved with getting yourself back in that area, into that mode. So it took us, a good 4 years to get, to a place where I was even able to like confidently feel good about what we were doing. And that's 4 years of your life. And when you're older, 4 years in your 40s and 50s are a lot different than 4 years in your 20s,
It is a lot different. So then, when you decided it was time to start something new, how did Apply come up? Why was it Apply? Why was it this? What transpired to make that happen?
Yeah, I think, I can give you the very origin story of Apply too, but I think the important thing with an entrepreneur doing a second startup, maybe in the same vein of the first startup, or a second business in the vein of the first business, there needs to be something that is decidedly different than the first thing that you did that makes it interesting enough to do it again. Because anything you start working on is going to take you years of your life. It's not going to materialize that quickly. And I think there's a generation of entrepreneurs which are kind of disappearing now, but they were like, if I work on something for 2 years and it's not turning into like the exit I wanted, then I'm out of here. I'm not working on it anymore. And I'm like, head scratcher. Like, when did anyone get those kind of results that quickly? But there was some period of time where it felt like the gold rush, where it's like, you could start a business and it could be successful in 2 years. But in my era, it was like a 7 to 10 year commitment. So I think part of it is like, I had to be willing to work on it for that long. And specifically with Apply, and I think this has been the benefit of, having a career that spanned now more than 30 years. It's like, you see these trends, they happen, and you're like, okay, this is the moment where it's time to move, and move quickly. Whether that's buying real estate in a market where all of a sudden you're like, gosh, this is going to be a really hot space to be in, or it's a business model change. In the case of Apply, it was clear that we were in the early innings of like humans having to do a lot of mundane, routine things, to going to automation and eventually AI, and where we're going beyond that. So it was a shift, just like when we had, cell phones that became smartphones that are evolving into, wearable devices. You see where it's going. And if you can have the gift of like having a little bit of foresight and seeing that if you get yourself in the right position, you can inherit the benefits of being in the right place at the right time. That's what Apply was kind of the draw for us. It was like, hey, there's this intersection of artificial intelligence and workflow automation that could take over this industry and make a massive impact. Let's get there quickly. So let's get working on it right away.
And how long has Apply been around now?
So we started in 2017. So, we're in 9 years now. Gosh, I can't believe it's been that long. It's longer than Propertyware, which is shocking. And that's an interesting one. Like, I don't know if you remember, like, your first, like, real love. Like, oh, I was dating him for like 6 years. And then all of a sudden you've been married for like 10. But before you were married for that length of your first relationship, it was hard to imagine like anyone being longer than their first one. And that's kind of what it is like with a startup. Like, your first startup is your first love. It's your first experience. It's your whole world. And then all of a sudden where you're at is longer and more meaningful. So the foundations of who I am and my identity was in Propertyware, but it got this kind of destroyed with acquisition and like, a company that didn't care about it and ultimately had other objectives. And so it hurts to see what happened to it. It hurts to see that, it isn't as vibrant as it should have been, but I'm trying to recreate that energy in what I do today.
That's amazing. And there is a lot of energy around Apply. I know that because I'm in the industry and I hear it all. And Apply is incredible. What would you give your 25-year-old advice? You said 13 earlier, but if you were talking to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
I think you're so impatient when you're young. You want everything to happen so fast, and I was no exception to that. I think I was in a rush, always in a rush, and I felt so much stress. And I think just an entrepreneur, you're always feeling stress. But I think early in my career, I thought success was mostly about speed, growth, and pushing hard. But over time, what I really learned, and I think you've learned this too, is that it's about relationships. It's about team. It's about health. It's about family. It's about enjoying the process just as, it's just as important as the outcome. Like, when I look back at Propertyware and, people see like the outcome, but like the process was so much more rewarding. Like, I remember distinctly, a gal who used to work for me, whose name was Elizabeth, and she was my EA, which went on to take much bigger jobs. But I remember telling her one day, it was a kind of a crappy day. I'm like, you know what? Someday we're going to look back at this and this is going to feel like a really great memory. And we're going to reminisce about this and it'll be positive, not negative. And it's turned out to be just that. I tell my younger self to be, trust my intuition a little bit more. Take time and just kind of like really enjoy what's happening right now. Don't think too far into the future. Some of the best decisions I ever made came from like, being around my customers and not feeling the stress that they were feeling, but just like kind of just like being in their world and enjoying where they're at and seeing how I can be helpful to them without necessarily having an agenda. And as you know, that's who I am now. But when I was young, I was just like, I had a goal and I had to figure out how to get there. And if you were talking to me, I was still thinking about me, not you. And that's kind of the evolution.
I think that's changed with the industry as well. Like, people have to understand this is a relationship business. No longer do people buy because of transactions. They buy because they care about the people and they care about the person behind the business. It's interesting how things have changed that way. But it's so incredibly important that anybody that wants to grow or sell or anything in a business or a relationship setting it's important to know. Real quick, and I want to be respectful of your time, but Sina, if you had one book to recommend to our listeners to help them in business, help them in to sell their business or acquire a business, what book would that be?
Oh my gosh, I read a lot of books. But people who know me, like, there's one specific book that defines me. It's The Alchemist by Paul Coelho. And part of that is because it's such a happy, easy story to read, but it has such deep meaning. And I think that's one of the ways that I love, like, that's the lesson I've learned in life is like simplicity, but with lots of depth. Because, that's usually what wins in the long haul. So it's a book about a boy who sells his flock of sheep, and he kind of goes off trying to search for the pyramids in the desert, and basically finds out, because he thinks there's gold there, and then he finds out that the gold was actually buried back in where he was in the beginning. It's a beautiful story, and it's filled with a lot of really interesting moments. Short read. If you don't like to read, you can also get on Audible. Jeremy Irons reads it, which is an amazing person to listen to on an audiobook if you're driving. But I think the alchemist pretty much defines how I view life, which is like, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. And sometimes, you are exactly where you're supposed to be, and you just have to like understand that and not be so anxious to go where you're going, but just to enjoy where you're at right now.
It's 100% about the journey. And I love that, because without the journey, you don't get the results either. But the journey is what teaches us, what creates us, what, we get to create the canvas. Next question real quick before we close up. But what is one common misconception about entrepreneur? Because in this industry right now, you're seeing more entrepreneurs come to the world. You're seeing more people go, hey, I can start a business. What's the biggest misconception of that?
Well, specifically right now, I think people think that because you can vibe code and you can just build a piece of software, that's the whole business, right? I just vibe coded this thing and, it should just be a whole startup. And I think it's funny because like for us as technologists, we look at it and like, I'll go back to my comment, like there are really no shortcuts to building a real company. Having just a prototype concept that you can turn into a product and hand somebody are no shortcuts for what it takes to build something that can scale and be there for 27 years, and to build relationships with people like you mentioned, and build trust and be able to build a team. And I mean, God, there's just no shortcuts. I think the biggest misconception is that the barriers of entry are so low and you should just jump in. I think it's really common for even the younger version of me to just do it. Let's just go. Let's just get started now. And I think there's real good reason to take a second to really think through what you're trying to do, because when you start these things, they do eat up quite a bit of your time, and they eat up people's money that they trust you. And then you can't just have a change of heart one day. I think I teach a lot of classes on AI, mostly for free, just with my customers and just hanging out with people and talking to them. But AI has a tendency to like have a lot of half-baked products in your life. So you'll have a scenario where you'll have 3 or 4 different projects you're working on and you just can't finish them because there's a new shiny penny to run after with AI to go work on. So I think another misconception is that, you can just work on 20 things and one of those will just work out for you. And it's like, no, business and successful business is about focus and commitment.
It's about focus and commitment. And what I was talking to someone the other day, we were on a podcast, and I said, what is interesting about entrepreneurship and what I don't think people really understand, within one business, you actually have multiple small businesses because you have accounting.
Right.
And you better run that accounting like a business, because literally it has to function like that. You have sales, you have marketing, you have operations, you have all these little businesses that you have to treat like that. And until you get big enough, guess what? You're running each of them. And then you start putting leaders in place. But it takes a certain amount of time to get up there unless you're funding it with capital from somebody else, using someone else's
100%
money. But I love that. I love our conversation. I know I could literally talk to you for days. You know that because I've kept you at a table at night at dinner just asking you questions. So I really
There's so much to unpack.
It.
I mean, I didn't get to ask you any questions, but yeah, I agree. There's a lot to unpack there. Let me just ask you one, because I'm sure people who are listening are thinking about it. Because you've had failures and success, like what advice would you give entrepreneurs in terms of like how you look at your failures and your successes when you look at the rest of your life? Because I mean, if they're selling a business to someone like yourself and they're going off to do the next thing, how do you coach people for the next chapter of their life?
First, I think, like I said earlier, I think the most important thing to understand is our failures and our struggles and the things that we go through actually create who we need to become. If we didn't have those, how would we become the person we need to become? So I would look at them as, hey, it's a learning opportunity, not so much a failure. That learning opportunity is going to give you the catapult to create something greater later on. And if you're selling your business today and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, go sit on a beach for a week. I would struggle doing that, but go sit on the beach for a week and literally sit there and then go, okay, what do I really want? And I think that's what entrepreneurs or anybody in life really has to ask themselves. What do they want? Not what they think someone else wants from them. And I think entrepreneurs struggle with that question. And they have to sit down and really go, hey, what do I want out of this or the next chapter? Because the only time you can really go through the grind again, and I know you're there, is when you really answer that question.
I couldn't agree more. That's so well said.
Well, I really appreciate you, Sina. Now, if anybody is listening on this that has a property management company or a company that could use Apply, what or where should they find it or find you?
Yeah, I mean, we sit at the intersection of kind of AI and workflow automation. We help people kind of re-engineer their business to embrace all the kind of the opportunities to work smarter, not harder. You can find us at GetApply, GetApply.com. And I'm an open book too. If you ever want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to talk to you as well. So I'm at Sina@GetApply.com.
And that's amazing. You never hear someone give their email on a podcast. But it's true. You do respond. It's amazing. No, like it's for you to even respond to me and spend as much time as you have with me. We greatly appreciate that. So thank you for coming on today, Sina. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in today to The Road Less Traveled. If you're organizing an event, workshop, or simply planning something exciting and would like to have Tiffany Rosenbaum join you or want to have her on your podcast, visit TiffanyMRosenbaum.com and click on Book Tiffany to get started.